So good afternoon to one and all present here. Principal KC College and Vice Chancellor HSNC University, Dr. Hemlata Bagla, Trustee and immediate past President of HSNC Board, Mr. Anil Harish, our distinguished panelists this afternoon, Dr. Ramaswamy, Dr. Sridhar, and Dr. Prajwal, participants in the webinar, and we have many of you joining from far and near, so glad to see you all, and of course, colleagues and dear students. On behalf of the Research Committee, KC College, I, Dr. Leena Pujari, convener of the committee, welcome you to this national webinar on interdisciplinarity and natural sciences disrupting the silos. Academic cultures, we all know, have for a long time been characterized by rigid disciplinary boundaries. In fact, such has been the separation and demarcation that there has been very little dialogue, whether across domains within the natural sciences, or let's say, for example, within the social sciences, or even between the natural and the social sciences. However, in recent times, we do see a blurring of this academic divide and attempts to move beyond one's disciplinary location. And in fact, we have read about attempts at integration in some of the science institutes in the country. This webinar seeks to build conversations around interdisciplinarity. It's about integrated forms of teaching, learning, and research, and underscores the need to disrupt not just the disciplinary silos, but also the entrenched hierarchies between different knowledge forms, which in many ways preclude attempts at a dialogue. While we believe that interdisciplinarity has the potential to reconfigure disciplines and enable a more enhanced understanding of complex social realities, we also know that we have operated in silos for far too long, and attempts at integration will certainly present humongous challenges. How do we address barriers that might impede this dialogue? How do we bridge the differences between disciplinary cultures? Can we reimagine our curriculum, pedagogy, and research in ways that break the silos? These are some of the questions that we are asking today. And we have a wonderful panel of eminent scientists to address these and many more questions. We do hope that the deliberations today will enable us to critically reflect on our own disciplines, revisit our epistemological and ontological positions, and build solidarities across disciplines. This webinar is a first in a series, and we wish to have more meaningful and enriching conversations around this theme of transgressing academic boundaries and the possibilities within. I wish to thank Dr. Geeta Chadda, sociologist at the University of Mumbai, for her critical inputs in the conceptualization and design of this program. I'm also thankful to my colleagues, Dr. Shalini Sinha and Dr. Sagarika Damle, coordinators of DBT STAR scheme and STAR status respectively, for their interest and inclination and their readiness to collaborate with us for this event. We have 9 departments. We have collaborated with 9 departments, science departments, for this program. We have in our midst today, Dr. Hemlata Bagla, who is not only the principal of KC College, but also the Vice Chancellor of the HSNC University. She is a well-known research scientist in the field of nuclear and radiochemistry, with more than 170 publications to her credit, including 9 in NASA's astrophysical database. Dr. Bagla takes a keen interest in interdisciplinary studies and has been most encouraging about interdisciplinary conversations. May I now invite Dr. Bagla to present her opening remarks.
First of all, Dr. Leena Pujari, thank you for a kind introduction, and also congratulations for leading from front when it comes to interdisciplinarity and natural sciences and the organization of such programs, and even being leading from the front so far research endeavors are concerned of KC College and HSNC University. A very good afternoon to Mr. Anil Harish, trustee of HSNC Board, trustee DM Harish Foundation, and founder of DM Harish School of Law. Dr. Prajwal Shastri, who is adjunct professor, International Center for Radio Astronomy from Australia. Dr. Sridhar, who is former professor of TIFR and now with Azim Premji University. Dr. Ramaswamy, who's also with us today, and he is visiting professor IIT Delhi and formerly professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University. We also have with us Dr. Leena Pujari, convener Research Committee and heading Department of Sociology, and very also a think tank and the leader who is working on the Liberal Studies program at HSNC University. She's also chairperson of Social Sciences, Sociology in HSNC University. We have vice principals with us, as she mentioned, Dr. Shalini Sinha, Mr. Justin, and other vice principals who have joined this afternoon, and Dr. Sagarika Damle, should I say Professor Dr. Damle, and who is a coordinator DBT Star Status Program of KC College. And all the dear students who are present here, once again, a very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of HSNC University, on behalf of KC College, I indeed feel very delighted to welcome all of you, all the intelligent minds who have joined this afternoon. Friends, HSNC University and KC College are academically delighted to bring in beautiful minds always, every platform, to create those conversations, to have such platforms where students get an opportunity to learn and to share their best thoughts with the greatest minds. And also we have taken care that we do all this choosing the contemporary topics. As of today, of massive impact in the management of scientific research. It marks a paradigm shift in the research culture, demanding a new mindset in the current generation of researchers. Nobel laureate Herbert Simon had pointed out that disciplines like nations are necessary evils that enable humans of bounded rationality to simplify the structure of their goals. So disciplinarity, when we talk about, is a deep knowledge about a domain. It is admittedly, unarguably, a great virtue in itself in a scientific research. If I take the classical example, it is our Nobel Prize winner, Sir C.V. Raman. Monogamous straitjacket. Then comes Madame Curie with her 2 Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry, symbolic of multidisciplinarity. If we look at the evolutionary history of epistemology or theory of knowledge, we find the emergence of interdisciplinarity over the constraints of disciplinarity. In my own field of academic specialization, I've seen chemistry and physics blending to physical chemistry and chemical physics. Explanation of the separation of chemical compounds in a gas chromatograph needs the principles of AD diffusion, needs principles of molecular diffusion and mass transfer, such as the convergence of disciplines in science. State-of-the-art research is characterized by transdisciplinarity, and its impact is massive. When we look at the protective mask, which we are wearing today, we can note the transcendence of disciplines, the chemistry of cellulose and polymers, the aerosol physics of viral particles, the biology of lung dynamics, and the engineering design of the barrier. In 2021, the knowledge economies of the world spent $2,000 billion on R&D, and a large part of it was for applied and directed research driven by interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects. So as we focus our concentrated attention on the significance of inevitability of interdisciplinary research, both for advancing the frontiers of knowledge and for realizing societal expectations with value of research, then I'm reminded of Dr. Homi Bhabha. He started the Atomic Energy Training School in 1957 and designed and delivered a unique interdisciplinary curriculum for the talented domain experts, where about 200 used to be selected across the country every year. The tradition continues till today, and around 15,000 nuclear scientists and engineers are trained on the elevations of interdisciplinary concept, and they have contributed to the nuclear heritage of the country. When we talk about, or when we witness the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope to the sun, or we read reports a couple of days back of the pig heart beating in the chest of David Bennett, we are reminded of the research culture of convergence and consilience of the disciplines. It is altogether fitting and proper that we learn from this webinar the basics of disciplinarity in research culture as we move forward with her Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020. Bluest of blue research is characterized by absolute monodisparity. Science is a human construct, and concern for man and his fate must be the chief endeavor of all scientific activity. Einstein reminded us that we should not forget this in the midst of our equations and graphs. The expanding interdisciplinary boundaries between natural sciences and social sciences are welcome markers of science as an enabler of policy decisions. We are taking brave steps. We continue to take the brave steps from the comfort of our own pet silos in an additive way to neighbor silos, and then interactively to interdisciplinary domain to the higher level synthetic transdisciplinary domains to build a sustainable world. Friends, at HSNC University, we have been engaged with the progress of new ideas. We dedicate our institution to the development of new ideas, and wherever and where interdisciplinarity makes it core. We strongly believe in the possibility of dialogue between and across disciplines. So today, when we have such intelligent minds to discuss on such a wonderful topic, I believe this will be our persistent efforts in expanding our interdisciplinary research domains, and we continue to encourage our students to take up such programs, take up or even inculcate such thought processes in our mindset so that we acquire such skills that today the science itself is only which survives will be interdisciplinarity and based on transdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinarity. So with this, I thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, and I request the committee to take it forward. Once again, a warm welcome to each one of you and joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bagla, for those words of wisdom and encouragement. And you've actually set the tone for the deliberations today. Thank you so much. We are privileged to have with us today a very distinguished member of the HSNC board, Mr. Anil Harish, a trustee and the immediate past president of the HSNC board. Mr. Anil Harish is a renowned lawyer by profession and a partner at the law firm DM Harish & Company. His practice includes diverse areas of law, including property, foreign investments, trusts, Indian and international taxation. He has been an office bearer of some prominent law institutes in the country and has been associated with several charitable and educational trusts. Mr. Anil Harish has authored several articles which have been published in Times of India, Hindustan Times, and several professional journals. An extremely soft-spoken and gentle personality, Anil sir is an eloquent speaker. And so we're extremely elated to have you in our midst today. I invite you, sir, to deliver the special address.
Thank you. Dr. Ramaswamy, Dr. Sridhar, Professor Prajwal Shastri, Vice Chancellor Dr. Hemlata Bagla, Dr. Leena Pujari, and ladies and gentlemen. I am perhaps the only lawyer in this group of very distinguished scientists and professors. But we all have something in common, and that is the desire to participate in the process of education. India had great universities thousands of years ago, Nalanda, Ujjain, Takshashila, and others, which attracted students from all over India and from other parts of the world. And we have a great scientific, philosophical, literary, and artistic tradition. In fact, the subject we are discussing today must have been discussed even in those days. It is said that Ujjain University specialized in astronomy and Takshashila in medicine, but that Nalanda was interdisciplinary and taught all subjects. This issue of interdisciplinary studies is something very relevant for HSNC University, which is a new and much smaller university than the existing large ones, and therefore has greater flexibility. So we ourselves have been debating this and attempting to see how relevant it is to India and to what extent and in what manner it should be implemented. It is said that a person may specialize in the left wing of the butterfly and another in the entire insect kingdom. But here we are considering going much beyond that and to see how completely different fields of study can be integrated to give a different result, such that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Today's webinar is on interdisciplinarity and natural sciences, but this issue comes up in other fields of activity as well. As a lawyer, I see an overlap between law and accounting in the field of income tax. For instance, what is the tax effect of creating a provision and of creating a reserve? Or what is the impact of the cash method of accounting and the mercantile method of accounting, or a hybrid system, on the tax liability of an assessee? So while a tax lawyer can proceed without much knowledge of accounts in some kinds of situations, it becomes imperative to go beyond one's discipline and to have a knowledge of other fields of learning, in this case, accounting. Also, a lawyer specializing in patents should also have a scientific background, and a scientist developing patents should know something about the law. The same is the case with medical jurisprudence. It is said of Steve Jobs that he took a course in calligraphy when he was in college, and that without him having done that course, the Macintosh computer would not have had multiple typefaces or proportionately spaced fonts. This has had a great impact on the use and development of graphics. While interdisciplinary studies can be taught, some people are natural polymaths. Leonardo da Vinci was a great painter and inventor and so much more. Aristotle's writings cover many subjects, including physics, biology, zoology, metaphysics, poetry, linguistics, politics, and economics. Closer to our time, Bertrand Russell, along with Professor Whitehead, wrote Principia Mathematica, a milestone in the development of classical logic, and his work has had an effect on mathematics, logic, linguistics, artificial intelligence, computer science, and many other fields. He was also a public intellectual and historian and a social critic, and of course, a Nobel laureate. Education in India has truly functioned in silos. This is not desirable because it limits human beings so much. For instance, when I was in school, they stopped teaching music when we were just 9 years old and stopped other languages such as French and Gujarati when we were 12. Then at the age of 13, we had to choose between arts and science without even knowing what it implied. And it was impossible in those days to switch over from arts to the science stream. I opted for arts. I'm very happy that I did, but if I had wanted to change, I just would not have been able to. So I'm glad that this is no more so and that there is much more flexibility now. In Mumbai, there have been many instances of people changing their professions. Dr. Niranjan Hiranandani, the provost of our HSNC University, in fact, was a chartered accountant and then became a leading real estate developer. Hotel Leela was started by Captain Nair, who was in the army and then had a textile industry and then moved on to hotels. So this does happen in practice, but education must enable us to do this and encourage us to do this because people's talents can surface at different times and in different circumstances. We are very fortunate today that Dr. Ram Ramaswamy and Dr. Sridhar and Professor Prajwal Shastri will have a panel discussion on this very important subject. They are all very renowned and have achieved so much. Dr. Sridhar has also written literary fiction in addition to being a theoretical particle physicist. In fact, Doctor, I have ordered your book and I'm looking forward to reading it. Dr. Ram Ramaswamy has done research in theoretical chemistry, statistical physics, and computational systems biology. He truly practices interdisciplinarity. as does Dr. Prajwal Shastri, an astrophysicist, but one who believes that the cultivation of scientific thinking is for everyone, and has written also on gender inequity as well as science and society. Ladies and gentlemen, on this subject, as in many others, discussion can go on forever, but it is important that one's thinking evolves, and we are able to apply the conclusions of these discussions and the scientific thinking to the situations which come before us. George Bernard Shaw said that it is the duty of each one of us to ensure that the candle burns more brightly when we pass it on than when we received it. I am sure that with the discussions today by the distinguished scientists and professors, the candle will burn much more brightly and will illuminate our lives in many different ways. I wish this national webinar all the best.
Thank you so much, sir, for that absolutely eloquent speech. You were actually able to establish the significance of interdisciplinary studies and how beautifully you drew from your own experiences, your childhood experiences of being in school and later in your profession. Thank you so much for that support and that encouragement, and we shall always look up to it. Thank you so much. We now come to the, the much awaited part of the program, the panel discussion. And before we go further, may I just invite my colleague, Dr. Sagarika Damle, to introduce our panelists for the session.
Thank you, Leena. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. A warm greeting to all the dignitaries, the panelists, all participants of this distinguished evening today. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce our panelist for the day. Dr. Rama Ramaswamy is currently a visiting professor of chemistry at IIT Delhi. He retired from JNU in 2018 after having taught there for 32 long years. He has also served as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad. Professor Ramaswamy's research interests have over the years been in the aspects of theoretical chemistry, statistical physics, molecular dynamics, and computational and system biology. He is the author of over 200 peer-reviewed publications and has edited about 30 books and conference proceedings. We feel privileged to welcome you, sir, for today's webinar. Our next eminent speaker of the day is Dr. Sridhar. Dr. Sridhar is a theoretical particle physicist and is currently professor at the Azim Premji University, Bangalore. Formerly, he was a professor at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Dr. Sridhar has published extensively in physics, including a book, Particle Physics of Brain Worlds and Extra Dimensions. He has also edited a volume, Breaking the Silo, Integrated Science Education in India. Dr. Sridhar is also a writer of literary fiction, has published a work of fiction called Twice Written, and has recently completed his second novel, provisionally entitled Ajita. He has interests in philosophy, especially of science, and is something of a planner in the visual art scene. We extend a hearty welcome to you, Dr. Sridhar. Our moderator of this panel is Dr. Prajwal Shastri, an astrophysicist who investigates the physics of giant black holes in distant galaxies and is currently the adjunct professor at the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research, Australia. Dr. Prajwal is extremely passionate about science outreach. She believes that the cultivation of scientific thinking is for everyone and works for the people's science movement towards this goal. She is also deeply concerned about the inequities in the sciences and attempts to bring an intersectional lens to the endeavors to mitigate them. She is founder and past chair of the Gender in Physics Working Group of the Indian Physics Association and member of the Working Group of Gender Equity of the Astronomical Society of India. in addition to her research publications and popular articles on astrophysics, her published work includes writing on gender inequity as well as science and society. On behalf of organizers, I welcome you all and I request Prajwal to take this program forward. Before I hand over the reins to you, I must confess that each one in the audience is looking forward to this stimulating discussion and is excited to traverse the distances between various disciplines to imbibe the real essence of interdisciplinarity in their teaching and learning process. Over to you, Prajwal. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much. Thank you very much to Lina in particular and colleagues for this, which I think addresses a very strong need of the hour. And it is indeed an honor for me to be part of it. So the title itself, which was not proposed by me, which has been proposed by all of you, has problematized the lack of interdisciplinarity in academia as currently practiced. But even so, rather than trying to sort of dive into addressing the root causes of siloization, we perhaps should look briefly at why we need interdisciplinarity, because those strands are perhaps intertwined with the root causes for the lack of interdisciplinarity. Right off the bat, however, I should say that I have been an astrophysicist all my career. And in that core interest, I have not really been challenged to cross disciplinary boundaries. So I'm not quite sure what qualifies me to be here today, when actually the biggest challenges of interdisciplinary research and indeed the intertwined challenges of interdisciplinary teaching arise when the boundary between the natural sciences and the social sciences or humanities are attempted to be crossed. But it's also true that within physics, astrophysics is the last bastion of the generalist, to quote the physicist Teilhard, and the absolutely cutting-edge knowledge creation that is happening in astrophysics today is happening within large meetings of minds, hundreds of them, who collaborate on using the observational, theoretical, and computational approaches with cutting-edge engineering, which earlier were very segregated and considered separate disciplines. And a significant number of such collaborations also aspire to be as international, as egalitarian, diverse, inclusive, and even decolonized as possible. So perhaps because of being exposed to this by being an astrophysicist, I cannot help being amused at the barriers to interdisciplinary thinking that I notice even among physicists. For example, if I casually say to a friend, so-and-so is a particle physicist just like you, I might get a response from her saying, but he is an experimental particle physicist, you know, with that kind of body language. And often implicit in that body language is the idea that, you know, he is not as brilliant as I am. So that's just to put one provocative strand out there. But if I shift then to the big picture and consider what the goals of higher education must be in a modern, forward-looking, democratic knowledge society, it becomes immediately obvious that interdisciplinarity in teaching and research is an imperative, as many of you have already said, because the goals of higher education have to be not just enabling of dignified livelihoods for everybody, but also building the capacity of critical thinking for everybody. And that is what a true knowledge society is. And what does critical thinking entail? At the very least, our students must have the capacity to intelligently engage with the current catastrophes that are confronting humanity, namely the environmental crisis, including climate change, the public health crisis exemplified by the COVID-19 pandemic, and inequity along multiple dimensions, both locally and globally. And these are the very same examples which also illustrate why interdisciplinary explorations driven by dismantling disciplinary silos are an imperative. So for example, solutions to anthropogenic climate change do not lie in technological fixes. And unfortunately, tech fixes are the mantra of a very large number of natural scientists, not only because we don't have the technology or won't realistically have practicable technology, or we won't have the technology within the required time frame, but there is something fundamentally flawed about that approach, because the root cause of anthropogenic climate change is the way we live our lives, and it is only an interdisciplinary approach to that which can unravel why. Even knowing since the 80s from science that climate change is happening, why is it that we are not able to address it? Is it the individual human mind itself which is the barrier, or is it the socioeconomic systems that humanity has created which are the barriers, or is it the socioeconomic consequences of these systems? Is it structural? Is it systemic, and so on? And educated young minds, regardless of what they have chosen to study for their passion or their livelihood, must have the capacity to intelligently engage with these questions using tools and methodologies drawn from multiple disciplines. Public health is another example, as exemplified by the COVID-19 pandemic, where we have seen the tremendous pitfalls globally of the consequences of designing healthcare for people as consumers of medical care, rather than for people as equal participants in health for all, and addressing crises such as tuberculosis in India, or mental ill health among teenagers, or the COVID-19 pandemic locally and globally. We are forced to acknowledge that health is not about just the discipline of medicine, which is itself an interplay of biology and chemistry, physics, statistics, and so on, but the socio-political context in which it plays out. And what is the role of the fact, for example, that clinical medicine is lucrative for some sections, whereas preventive healthcare is not lucrative. Good health for all is not just about access to medical services, but also about all the determinants of health. Besides which, there are very strong lessons from history, which we would be very foolish to ignore. So then, what are the barriers to interdisciplinarity within higher education? So there are obviously structural barriers. So someone who has a PhD in interdisciplinary research, where will they get a job in academia? Because if they've done work crossing, for example, medicine and economics, to study the role of corporatization of pharmacology in access to healthcare, for example, or if they've done a PhD in physics and education on how, for example, the lens of equality of educational outcomes can offer certain choices of physics pedagogy over other choices, or say an interdisciplinary PhD in ecology and political science, for example, looking at how political institutions of influence in a given ecosystem affect the ecological health of that system, or even how ecological health gets defined in that system. Then which department will hire this person, right? The ecologists in the ecology departments, or the physicists in the physics departments, or the economists in the economics department will expect a bunch of nature papers or physical review papers or whatever in that discipline. And moreover, they will be quite incompetent to judge, say, the pedagogical thread of the physics educationist, or the political science of the ecologist, or the medicine of the public health scientist. And even if there is a visionary leader of an institution who is highly driven and does hire such interdisciplinary people, there is still the question of their future, their promotion, and so on, which involve many more people than just this one messiah. And so they run into the same pitfalls. But in India, there is an additional layer that is a barrier, I think, and that is the societal construct in India that really seeps into our academic practice. And this is a mindset that tends to map competence in science and math to some sort of innate intelligence. So it's quite the norm that a child who's getting good marks in science and maths in school is talked of as being really intelligent. I mean, I've not heard a youngster who plays the veene very beautifully and creatively, or plays volleyball really well, being described as innately intelligent. And therefore, of course, this intelligent youngster should pursue science and maths later on and so on. And this mindset of privileging science and maths over other disciplines persists very strongly among school teachers, college teachers, university professors, and research scientists, namely my cohort of people. In fact, a couple of months ago, I was listening to the famous journalist Sainath in some webinar, and he mentioned being a student in Loyola College, Madras, a highly regarded college. But when he chose to do history for his undergrad, he got called to the principal's office, saying that was an option that only zoology rejects took, and why wasn't he doing science? Another barrier, perhaps, and I don't really know if this is an independent barrier, which is the barrier of disciplinary sort of insecurity. I mean, there's always the minority of scholars who are driven to address real problems on the ground and therefore driven to interdisciplinary explorations, but typical disciplinary academics see themselves as only competent in their own discipline, which can breed an insecurity when confronting not only others who are interdisciplinary, but can also lead to resistance to acknowledging that interdisciplinary approaches are needed, even if not in their own discipline, but beyond that, right up to world problems. And this attitude could and does become hegemonic within institutions of higher education and could push interdisciplinarians into ghettos who have to then fight for their own space, both physical, intellectual, their own funding, etc. The problem of gender inequity within the sciences has been a good example for me to illustrate some of these points. And I particularly bring it up as an example because all three of us panelists here have a history of being concerned with this inequity and how to address it. So physics is among the worst disciplines globally for gender inequity. But here too, I strongly experience a huge resistance to dialoguing with social scientists, educationists, or philosophers when trying to figure out what to do about it. In fact, both the Indian feminist movement and the feminist studies scholarship within Indian academia are quite advanced, but the efforts to bring about gender equity within physics have drawn very little from these movements. In fact, Professor Bindu Bamba, a physicist from University of Hyderabad, is the only physicist I know who was also a founder member of a gender studies department when they were founded in the universities. I must mention another example of Padmabhushan Hosur Narsimaya, popularly known as HN here in Karnataka, who is an accomplished physicist and physics teacher, also a Gandhian and in the vanguard of the rationalist movement, who played a strong role in shaping Bengaluru as a science city. And he did that not just by showcasing the accomplishments of science, but also inculcating scientific thinking as a way of life, and in particular strongly advocating for the abolition of caste from our lives and our society. And he, as Vice Chancellor of Bangla University in the 70s, not only started departments of political science and dance and music and theater and so on, but also tried to make the undergraduate curriculum interdisciplinary across the natural and social science and humanities. He went as far as getting the university to discuss scheduling of the timetable, but it apparently fell apart at that juncture. So I will now hand over to our first panelist. I don't want to set time limits because I hope this can be more of a conversation where we can interrupt each other and so on. So I will now request Ram to say his words.
Thank you very much, Prajwal. And let me start. Okay, I have made a few slides just to help me to focus my thoughts and to speak. Although I do realize that after Dr. Bagla, then Mr. Harish, and then Prajwal, I barely have anything left to say. because all of you have covered the whole, process of interdisciplinarity and, everything else so well. Nevertheless, since I have prepared some slides, let me roger on regardless and tell you some partly anecdotally and partly from personal experience and so on, what my take on interdisciplinarity is. Right, okay, oops, okay. For me, nothing typifies interdisciplinarity and the need for it in quite so direct a way as a subject that I've been doing research in for a long time. This is a subject that more or less started in the 60s and it's popular now, but there was a time when there were very few people who knew about chaos theory. This is the theory of why things are apparently random, why they cannot be predicted, and are they completely just noise or do they have some structure? Now, chaos theory is really the study of the order that underlies apparently random motion of complex systems. And a subject like this actually applies to a huge range of disciplines. Over the last 50 years or so, we have begun to understand some of the reasons for this complexity. The motion of natural objects, how atoms and molecules move and collide with each other, how planets and meteors and, the whole, everything. Every object in the universe is subject to this kind of complexity. Now, the theory itself has had an impact on a variety of areas that range from physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, etc., ecology, climate change, pandemics, the works. The list is really long. Now, what I want to share with you is that where did this subject start? One can go back to prehistory and so on, which I will not do. But in recent, in the last 50 years or so, the first paper that talked about this subject was a paper written by a man called Ed Lorenz. And the title of the paper was Deterministic Non-Periodic Flow. It appeared in the Journal of Atmospheric Sciences in the year 1963. In the year 1964, there was a paper by two astrophysicists, Michel Henon and Carl Hiles, The Applicability of the Third Integral of Motion, Some Numerical Experiments. In 1971, there was a paper that was written by David Ruel and Floris Starkins entitled On the Nature of Turbulence. And in 1976, a paper by Robert May in Nature, Simple Mathematical Models with Very Complicated Dynamics. These are not the founding papers of the field, but these are some hugely influential papers, each one of them with several thousand citations, which have really shaped the course of what we think about as chaos theory, nonlinear science, and it affects, like I said, so many different areas. Now, this is one example of a major scientific advance that has become possible, I would say, primarily due to interdisciplinary thinking. As I've already indicated, Lorenz was a meteorologist, and he was doing computer simulations just one second while he was doing computer simulations, and these are really the pioneering studies in modeling the atmosphere, which eventually have paved the way for somebody like Manabe and Hasselmann, who got the last year's Nobel Prize in Physics, and so important for climate change. Henault and Hailes were astrophysicists who were interested in questions of the stability of the solar system. Their work has had a huge impact on physics and chemistry. It's also helped to start off the field of quantum chaos, and today it has an impact on quantum information theory. Ruel and Tarkins were both mathematicians, and they made very significant advances to our understanding of turbulence and gave us the term strange attractors in sort of somewhat common parlance. The person who really put it all together and made it accessible to a very wide audience was a biologist, Robert May, who wrote this very influential review in Nature. And he showed that it was the same mathematics that was the underpinning of irregular phenomena in very diverse fields. Now, the history of science is replete with people who have been educated in one area and who have gone on to make fundamental advances in another field. Very close to home, we have Venki Ramakrishnan, who got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for work done in biology. And his undergraduate and graduate education was really in physics. He was a condensed matter physicist to start with. Another Indian in this list, G.N. Ramachandran, was somebody who started out in optics. He was a PhD student of C.V. Raman, and it wasn't until something like 10, 15 years after he started as an independent scientist that he saw the first biological crystal that was accessible to him. So, and he has gone on to be immortalized in biology in terms of the Ramachandran plot. Max Delbruck, again a physicist who came to the study of bacteriophage, and Francis Crick, who discovered the structure of DNA, was also a physicist. So these are some examples of people who have been educated in one area and who have gone on to make very fundamental advances in another. It doesn't work quite so easily for everybody. You can shift fields and move around and do things, may not always make fundamental advances in another. And some fields do take well to this kind of cross-fertilization. Mathematics is not one of them. I searched, in preparing for this talk, I was sort of wondering whether I could come up with an example of somebody who switched to mathematics from literature or something like that, but hasn't been done. The closest I could come to was Ed Witten, who is a string theorist of exceptional achievement. I think he started out as a history major, but I really don't know. Now, Prajwal has already mentioned this, and others have also, that fields, actually Dr. Bagla did, fields expand typically at the boundaries. And at these boundaries, we create new subdisciplines that grow and then evolve into other disciplines. So the example of biology plus chemistry gives biochemistry, which is by now it's a classic subject because it's already 100 years or more old. But now we have a new coinage, looking at the focus a little differently, call it chemical biology. Now, such advances usually require new thinking. And at the very least, we need people who are willing to think in a new manner. You see, so we've seen this, there is a sort of a cyclicality to the way in which we think and classify and do various things. For example, people started out doing biology by describing organisms and classifying them and so on and so forth, and then went to the more reductionist approach that was common in physics and chemistry to look at smaller and smaller entities. And eventually this culminated in the field of molecular biology, which was sort of essentially created in 1953 when the molecular structure of DNA was discovered. Now, that's been going, that's a very successful program, and people have had incredible successes with it. But today, and at least for the past 10, 15 years or so, it has been felt that just knowing what molecules there are does not tell you about biology, so you need a more systems way of thinking. Now, if you have to create this field called systems biology, one has to be able to talk about a system. So you need to talk about biology, but think like an engineer or like an applied mathematician. And this is not easy, especially mid or late career. So such revolutions are best, in my opinion at least, left to the young. Of course, young keeps changing. The definition of young keeps changing each year for me. But this is a moving boundary, and I would just say that mid-career people, early to mid-career people could possibly be doing this kind of revolution. But unfortunately, youth is wasted on the young, as George Bernard Shaw said. When you are young and you know that you can do a lot of things, learn many languages, I think one example was already put, or learn different things, one doesn't have the time. So the point is that sometimes this is not an easy balance to achieve. Now, I believe that in order to enable interdisciplinary thinking, you cannot mandate it right now, but we need to rethink the way in which we teach. Not in terms of this new education policy or similar position papers, because I'm not as enthusiastic. Is somebody called Harry V requesting remote control of your screen or mine? Just a second, please, because, okay. All right. I want to go beyond policy papers like the new education policy or National Education Policy 2020 and other such things. But I believe that it is important for us, and I'm sensitive to the fact that you all are a young and very adaptive and flexible university. So I think that an approach that will enable interdisciplinary thinking should at least give some thought to these points. Anyone being educated today, anyone starting college today, will be active at least 50 years from now. And I'm just going by life expectancy and the fact that I went to college 50 years ago. So if that was true for me, it's true for, right? It's very difficult to imagine what you will need to know in 2070. So to be productive till reasonably late in life, one needs some absolute good basics. To my way of thinking, mathematical training, mathematical thinking is non-negotiable. I mean, it doesn't even matter to me what you teach, and regardless of which discipline a person is pursuing, some amount of mathematics and some amount of numeracy is important. Experimental method is non-negotiable again, because regardless of field, because there is no substitute for personal experience. And I believe that that is the one thing that gives people a handle on reality. I personally feel we teach too much. Just stuff so many classes and so many hours of lectures every week and so on and so forth. I think that it is important to teach less, but give the student more flexibility in what they choose to learn, guide and so on. And I think that that's important. And especially because there are so many ways of learning now, and the classroom itself can be quite limiting. Anyway, this is more for discussion later on. Prajwal already mentioned the pandemic. What do you need in order to cope with this pandemic? So you need genomics to identify the virus. I'm just coming out of a bout of COVID, and I have declared that it must be Omicron. Not because I've done the genomics, but just because I've got it at this particular point in time and I have a scratchy throat, etc., etc. Okay, but we need genomics to identify the virus. We need virology to deal with the virus and to develop vaccines. We need statistics to understand the situation at a population level. You need mathematical modeling to make testable hypotheses. Need molecular biology for this RT-PCR and rapid antigen test. And we need physics for sanitization, ultraviolet and chemistry and so on and so forth. But as Prajwal also pointed out, we need to understand how people move, how they interact with one another. So we need sociology. We need network theory to understand who meets whom. How do you figure out the logistics of moving vaccines from one place to another and making sure that people get it in time? And we need public health professionals to figure out strategies at the population level. Now, bringing so many types of expertise together today can only be done by collaboration. But the inadequacy of education that addresses only one or two of these disciplines is painfully evident, because we don't have anybody who can deal with more than one of these kinds of issues at a given point in time. And particularly when we are trying to integrate ideas from the social sciences and results of quantitative analysis from the natural sciences and statistics, the lopsidedness of our present educational system is a major limitation. So, and coming to the end of what I wanted to say actually, multidisciplinarity is needed not as a mandate, okay, because you cannot mandate that thou shalt be multidisciplinary any more than you can mandate innovation. Right? And thou shalt do only what thou art capable of. But okay, I think it's something that if a person wants to do it, and we must be in a position to enable it. And so in a sense, this is an appeal to university leaders, administration, and so on, that we need to fashion our educational model so that this kind of flexibility becomes possible. There's a lovely saying from the Greek, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Somehow my screen is a little, I'm not, just a second, please. Okay. This is by a Greek philosopher called Archilochus, and the original statement in Greek is written below. And since we are all very familiar with the viral variations, those are all the letters of the Greek alphabet for which there is a virus type, subtype. Now, this is a statement which was made popular by Isaiah Berlin, who wrote a light-hearted essay about the hedgehog and the fox. But he was basically talking about two types of thinkers. Those kinds of thinkers or writers who have one big idea and just pursue it relentlessly all the way through, or those who know a lot of different things. And just as an example, Shakespeare was a fox. He knew a lot of things. Einstein was more like a hedgehog. He knew one really big thing and he knew it so very well. There is merit to this. In present company, Prajwal is probably more like a hedgehog and I'm more like the fox. But there are merits to both ways of thinking, and what is important for us to do is to realize this, recognize this, and enable it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ram. And let's have Sridhar now. I hope you're unmuted. Yes, you are. Yeah, go ahead, Sridhar.
Okay, thank you, Prajwal. Thank you, everyone, Leena, especially for inviting me here today. Like, of course, it's become almost a ritual in all these panels to say that the previous panelists have said everything that I needed to say. So I'm going to say something different to make sure that the previous panelists have not said anything that I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about interdisciplinarity in somewhat more formal ways. I'll attempt to. I don't know if it will go down well, but I'll certainly attempt to talk about it in more formal ways. In the sense that I'm saying we have already heard a lot about how interdisciplinarity is actually achieved in practice, what have been the attempts, how fields merged into each other, especially in the sciences and so on. Also, interdisciplinarity as a weapon to deal with crisis. I mean, COVID example was given. And so that has also been said. I'm going to not dwell too much on that aspect, but ask what is interdisciplinarity? How does one, in what mode does one realize interdisciplinarity? These are the two primary things that I would like to talk about. But before I start, I wanted to actually connect with something Mr. Anil Harish said. He mentioned one great public intellectual of our times, the philosopher, mathematician Bertrand Russell. And there is a lesson to be learned from Russell, I feel. When it's an important lesson for interdisciplinarity. And that is, I think Ram mentioned something about, how creative can one be, because just because we move fields, we may not achieve something great in the other field. My own take is that it's not so much about what we achieve in the new domain, and it's not about achievement measured using certain criteria which have been accepted as such, but it is about the willingness to actually not necessarily either move domains, but not necessarily move domains, but even if you stay within the confines of a discipline, trying to appreciate and understand the worldview, the complexity of another discipline. And that, for individuals, there is a lesson here. So there are two aspects to interdisciplinarity. One is we can talk about interdisciplinarity at the level of the disciplines themselves, the fields themselves, in domains of knowledge. But there is also the practitioners, the individuals who are involved in this. And I think the willingness, the openness of heart that practitioners, academicians need to demonstrate, that is very, very important. Without that, we can't even start talking about all this. And in that sense, Russell is a great example. I mean, he was as academic a philosopher as you get. He worked in subjects as arcane as you can hope to ever work in. One of his famous proofs that he actually proved in the Principia, which Anil Harish referred to, was the proof of how 1 + 1 is equal to 2. And this is a very abstruse and difficult proof to understand. Russell was that kind of a mathematician, worked on mathematics and logic and analytic philosophy. But at the same time, he was never hesitant to stand up, express his opinion as a public intellectual, take political positions. In fact, during the late part of the First World War, he even got arrested and he was jailed for actually taking an anti-war position. But he remained a pacifist all his life. He remained true to that pacifism, to the extent that you'll all be surprised to know that in 1968, there was a film made by Hindi film director called Mohan Kumar. That film was called Aman, and which had Rajendra Kumar and Sarah Banu playing the lead roles. And Bertrand Russell actually appears in that film. So Mohan Kumar, this was an anti-war, anti-nuclear war film. And Mohan Kumar actually approached Russell. And for Russell, this cause of pacifism was so important that he actually was willing to appear, and he appeared in this film. That scene in which he appears does not make immense sense actually, but nevertheless, he was willing to step down from the ivory tower of his Cambridge perch and come down to appearing in a Bollywood film. Which other Nobel Prize winner has appeared in a Bollywood film? So there is a very important lesson for interdisciplinarity that we take from there. It's that openness and willingness. And that openness and willingness does not come because we have set up disciplines in this very rigid way. We go on talking about silos, but these silos are worse than silos. Silos, the way I see silos at least, are things that exist alongside each other. These are hierarchical silos. They are on top of each other. And once you have established these hierarchies, the willingness to open up to other modes of thinking, other ways of reasoning, other ways, other methods, methodologies, I think that becomes, people become very resistant to that, and that becomes one of the biggest hurdles to achieving anything like interdisciplinarity. Okay, so having said that, what is interdisciplinarity? What do we mean by interdisciplinarity? One can say that it's a bit of an afterthought because we have taken the domain of knowledge and there was this universe in front of us, whatever we understand as the universe, and we have chosen to look at it from several vantage points. And in the last 300 years, use those vantage points to such extremes that they have crystallized into disciplines. Okay. But now the trap is that we are stuck in these kind of disciplinary domains. There is no way out of it. Okay. Disciplines exist, and way our thinking has developed over these last 300 years is to say that if we do not gain expertise within a discipline, then we really don't amount to anything. The most ardent supporters of interdisciplinarity are definitely going to say this if they are really pushed to the corner and asked, what about disciplinary expertise? Today, if we have an illness and we need to go to a doctor, we don't go to any random doctor. We go to a specialist, a person who knows exactly how to treat the left knee that I have a problem with. And I would not go to a specialist who has knowledge of the right knee that I may not have a problem with. Okay, so we have specialized domains of knowledge, and we have created experts within these domains of knowledge. And expertise is a concept itself that we need to problematize, because within academics particularly, expertise has become such a strange word that is bandied around in very troublesome ways. Because very often when you have any kind of conversation across disciplines, most people will retreat into the safety of their disciplines by saying, oh, I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about this other domain. Okay. Which apparently is a statement of their humility, their that they are so willing to express their ignorance of something else. But it's in fact not coming out of any humility, but it is coming out of a disciplinary arrogance. And it is the arrogance which says that to say that I don't know anything about that other thing is to in fact point towards yourself and say within this discipline, I know everything that there is to be known. Okay, at least this is the kind of view I take when I receive a statement like this. But having made these disciplines and having made a hierarchy of disciplines, The question is really now, how can one disrupt that? First of all, do you need to disrupt that? Is it desirable? I think previous speakers have gone into that at length. And both for because of questions of progress, of discipline's progress, and both also because of the challenges that one may face, which may be both academic challenges or real world challenges that we may face. It is important to come together and tackle problems, and that is the major motivation for interdisciplinary work. The desirability, given that there is the desirability, one can ask whether it is possible at all. And how does interdisciplinarity then talk to this very established silos of disciplines? I think it was Stephen Tullman, this philosopher, who said very nicely that interdisciplinarity was a big debt to the disciplines, because it's only within a discipline context that you can talk of interdisciplinarity. If we had not divided this into disciplines, there would be no talk today about, this particular panel discussion wouldn't have been happening, in fact. I mean, imagine a world populated with the Da Vinci's. I mean, you're not going to have interdisciplinary seminars there, right? I mean, so the thing is, it is through the discipline now that, I mean, that is our predicament. I mean, that's the paradox that we are inhabiting. That is only through the disciplines and through the mastery of the disciplines that we can actually also start looking outside the discipline. Okay. Fox and the Hedgehog. You know, we probably are at a time now, especially because we have been trained to be hedgehogs for so long. We are probably in a certain epoch, I feel, in a certain epoch in human knowledge, where we have to give up this binary between the fox and the hedgehog. And depth and breadth actually start becoming inverses of each other. I mean, people who know mathematics know what I'm saying, but there is a way because you explore the depths of a subject, you also then gain breadth. If you're willing to see that breadth and accept that breadth and get over any kind of arrogance around this issue. But having said that, it's really important to ask, how are we going to, what are the modes in which interdisciplinarity can be achieved? Okay. Does interdisciplinarity mean multidisciplinarity? Do we take a multitude of different approaches and put it together? Also, many of the people I've seen who apply for interdisciplinary projects, one coming from subject A, the other coming from subject B, third coming from subject C. It is more to satisfy the demands of a project that you want to bring A, B, C together. It may also be that A and B can do this work only because C, the person working in domain C, has a apparatus or instrument that they can use. The person who is actually going to rent time on that apparatus is not interested in what A and B are doing, but more interested in getting onto this project and getting the name onto a few papers simply for renting time on the apparatus. So this kind of interdisciplinary research is also happening. And that's not what we want to engage with. What we want to understand is that, is there a way of moving from this setup that we have made of disciplines to another way of understanding things? Maybe it's a utopia, maybe it can never be realized. Maybe we'll never be successful in doing it when we will stuck. Now that we are in the domains, we'll never be able to get out of these domains. These are all open questions. I don't think anyone has an answer to that. But what one needs to achieve if one wants to do interdisciplinarity is not to come in, even with a multitude of, even if there is the willingness to come together, it is not enough to just come from a multitude of perspectives, because then the question that bothers you is, are we agreeing on the epistemological and ontological assumptions that are being made within each domain? Because each domain then defines its universe. Each domain defines what is out there. Each domain says, this is the way I'm going to get knowledge of the universe out there. And in doing that, each domain keeps some part of the universe as relevant, leaves out some other part of the universe as irrelevant. Okay. Now, if you are now talking about moving from one to another, bringing one closer to another, or using an approach which integrates both these, then we really have to understand how are we going to cross these epistemological and ontological hurdles. It's actually like a steeplechase. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles to cross here, and it's not an easy task, right? There are many pitfalls, but I think if one keeps a larger kind of goal in mind, the desirability of something like an interdisciplinary activity itself is going to open up these spaces. And for that, the onus, I think, it has to be, or the responsibility has to be shifted from research to pedagogy. I think pedagogy has a huge responsibility, has a huge role to play here. And I don't know how far back we can go, whether we can go back to the school level or whether we should tackle this at the university level or so on. But new kind of pedagogy, which is not just interdisciplinary, but integrative in the sense that I'm talking about, has to be conceived of. Okay, only that pedagogy will help us interrupt the juggernaut course of the disciplines. Otherwise, we are all going to get crushed under the wheels of Lord Jagannath's chariot if we just give in to the disciplines the way we are doing now. Okay. I think I'll end by saying Walter Kaufman, the great scholar, philosopher who wrote these fabulous books on Nietzsche, he wrote a book called The Future of the Humanities. And in that, he has a very interesting thing to say about interdisciplinarity. He says, interdisciplinarity is dangerous, but almost everything in life we value is dangerous, including love. So I think I'll end here.
Thanks a lot, Sridhar. We have a little bit of time, maybe for a little bit of conversation between us before we invite questions from the audience, which are beginning to trickle in already. So I was wondering, given especially that this is a new university and they have the opportunity to chart their path in many ways, whether one can look at what can such a nascent university do, because I think there is overall agreement that we're not. I don't think any of us assembled here are debating the need for interdisciplinarity. I think everyone agrees it's an imperative for multiple reasons. So how can a new university which has certain opportunities chart a new path? And by the way, I wanted to mention, so one simple thing, for instance, to do with segregation has been done before, and in fact there's an astrophysicist called David Helfand from Columbia University who was president for several years and was otherwise involved with a university called Quest. And he has given a really illuminating TED talk on the sort of underlying thought processes. And one of the very simple things they talk about is to not have physical departments, but have all the faculty share the same physical space. And what I find, at least, I don't know how it is in Maharashtra, but in Karnataka, I find that, for example, even in a college, the undergrad, meaning the undergrad BA, BSc teachers will have a different office space from the science teachers who are teaching the pre-university level, although both are in the same college. So the segregation, it just not only goes according to discipline, but it even goes according to level, and then that creates hierarchies, because it's not just about difference, it's also about hierarchy. So this is one, very sort of a simple thing that some of these institutions have put in place to at least take a step in that direction of interdisciplinarity and the arrogance of disciplines and all of that which Sridhar mentioned. So I was wondering what kind of such steps can a new university take, and whether you had anything to say about it. Maybe just a couple of minutes, because there were a couple of other questions also that I wanted us to address before we go to the audience. So
you asked, didn't you?
Go ahead.
Okay, no. I mean, look, I've already given my list of what I believe can, catalyze a certain interdisciplinary way of thinking. I mean, let's also admit that most people are at a university to enable themselves to get a job. At some point in time, that is the major motivation for a large fraction. And those come easily in our way of organizing the working world. They come easily if you are in a discipline. So, you can get a particular job if you have a BSc in chemistry or in physics or this or that or the other. There are very few jobs that will come up for, people who have 2 or 3 or whatever different kinds of specializations. By and large, I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions, but there are. I personally feel that if a new university can reduce the amount of formal teaching and make a little more practice-based education, that could actually help a lot. Because the formal teaching has a way of somehow, highlighting examinations as the most important thing to do, because that's, you've taught so much in a class, you need to know whether you were, you've been understood or whatever it is. So if a certain amount of practical experience can be worked into the curriculum, I think that could actually do wonders. And this could be in terms of, experiments, computer programs, field work, field research, etc., etc.
Yeah, but I was actually wondering, I was talking about the faculty. So, faculty can design such programs if they themselves are into this kind of a thinking. But how can what can institutions do at a structural level? So, for example, even the construction of office spaces, how do they do their project designs? Do they promote interdisciplinary projects in the final year of the master's or BSc or whatever? What are their promotional processes? So, do they bring in interdisciplinary scholars on their promotion committees? And also fundamentally, how does one address this arrogance of disciplines? So especially, I mean, I would say, if we can put it in the context of this new university, which has a lot of leeway, hopefully.
See, I'm not a great fan of just putting all faculty in one place and saying that you all are all together and go ahead and teach now. Because ultimately you do need people to talk to. I think that, without necessarily getting into turf battles, the nature of academic work and discipline, in terms of not the field, but in terms of actually producing some research output, is I think it should be a fairly consuming interest in the life of a scholar. And for that, you need some kind of loosely defined structure. I'm for a porous structure rather than for no structure.
Sridhar, did you want to weigh in on that?
Oh, weigh in is when you have people like Ram speaking, how can I weigh in? But no. So especially I want to say in the context of the new university, some of us have already been discussing and trying to see how to put together a program, in fact, a master's program here, and which will serve to build people up for an interdisciplinary kind of research and teaching path. So that is the hope. We have worked very hard for a year on a curriculum of this sort. And I think it's actually nice that in this university they are giving us the freedom to experiment with these ideas. Because most often what will happen is it will not even get the support and backing that it needs, because people are used to disciplinary thinking, and it's very difficult to then say, no, let's move out of that and do something else. I mean, danger is, of course, we can fail, but if we fail, we'll fail in a brilliant way. So there's no harm trying something new like this.
Yeah, I mean, I
just remembered one thing, which not directly addressing your question, but I just thought I should mention this because it's so curious how deep this disciplinary location matters to people in our country. There is this brilliant moment in this film by Anand Patwardhan, Ram Ke Naam, where he's talking to a group of what were they called? Not karmacharis, they were called something. People who are actually fighting for the Ram temple, and they want the Ram temple to be built in precisely the spot where the Babri Masjid existed.
Karaks or something.
Karaks, yeah. Kar Sevaks, sorry.
Kar Sevaks, yeah.
So he talks to a group of young men who are brandishing knives and swords, and he asks them, so how do you know that this is the exact spot that he was born? So they say, no, we know this. We have enough evidence for this, and we know it's not an inch away from here. It's precisely here. Then he asks one of them, okay, if you know that so well, can you tell us when he was born? Can you, I mean, even roughly within 1 or 2 centuries, if you can locate Ram's birth, that will help. I mean, this man is stumped, of course. At that point, he immediately retreats to a disciplinary weapon and says, नहीं मैं तो लॉ कर रहा हूँ ना, लॉ में तो हम ये नहीं सीखते हैं, ये तो कोई इतिहास में जो चला जाता है उसको ही पता होगा, लॉ में तो हमको ये नहीं सिखाते हैं. So this is exactly what we do, frankly, even within our academic circles, because that retreat into our disciplinary, it's because we feel exposed otherwise. That is the point. So I don't know, it didn't directly connect with your question, but this was something that I thought I would share.
Yeah, but I was trying to sort of try and think about addressing that very, arrogance of the discipline, because we are in this conundrum where most of us are educated in disciplinary ways, and therefore most of us are vulnerable to this arrogance. And so then how do we proceed to build capability in the young minds to do things differently? So, I mean, for example, this sort of idea of broad-based education and how the ideas that even H. Narasimhaiah tried to implement in Bangalore University in the 70s, and which many American universities have implemented for much longer and so on, and some universities are trying now. I mean, it also gels with what Ram said about how we teach too much in terms of quantity, and so there is definitely room to reduce that quantity and introduce the sort of breadth requirement. And I think one way of articulating this I was really struck by was one of the colleges, one of these undergraduate colleges in the US, which said that at the end of your undergraduate degree, you have to show that you understand the mode of inquiry of the sciences, the humanities, and the arts. So this is how they articulated how, or at what stage somebody would be given a degree. So how can we sort of bring that spirit? Because Sridhar, you also talked about how interdisciplinarity is not simply using skills of different disciplines, but also empathizing with the worldview of a particular discipline, which is not one's own. So.
No, so that I think, as I already said, it's only if we really overall the kind of pedagogy that's already in place, the kind of curricula that are already in place. And so I have encountered this question with talking to a lot of my science colleagues. They have defined, I mean, I'm now specifically talking about science, but they feel that if you're in a science class going to bring up a discussion on, let's say, inequity of some kind, that you have somehow wasted time in the science class because you have not imparted some information. Okay, and there is never any thought given to are these domains so completely separate from each other? In a physics class, is it not possible for me to address questions of class or caste or gender? Do physicists not get affected by caste and class and gender? I mean, this is a question that one really needs to push. And if we don't push it, we have established curricula, and a subject like physics particularly, it's very well settled. You don't have to disrupt it at all. It's you produce, it's like a machine that keeps producing, the Descartes machine, in fact. So that is what we need to understand, how to do that. I mean, in particularly social sciences, humanities, a lot of the studies domains have emerged, various areas which have now started looking critically at disciplinary domains, brought in these questions of inequity to the forefront. I think this has to be done in science. It's our duty to do that. And I don't know whether I have an immediate answer to give you how it can be done, but some attempts are being made. This university's, syllabus itself is going to be one example of something like that.
Okay, so let's go to some of the questions that are coming from the audience. So one question is, do you think cross-fertilization of disciplines is sometimes not possible, not because people are resistant, but because some disciplines are inherently philosophically incompatible? For example, the assumption that the world is real and out there versus the world is created in and by the mind. So who would like to take this? Sridhar?
Yeah, I don't mind going. Actually, this is a very interesting question. I had wanted to say something like this, but because I had not put down all my thoughts on slides, I kind of forgot to say this. But let us say I'm a idealist philosopher who believes that the world is not quite out there. And that, like Schopenhauer said, that the world is my idea, that it doesn't exist out there in, or that I'm a particle physicist and I think that this world is made up of 12 kinds of different particles and that's all that is there and there's nothing else. Okay. The question is whether that philosopher or me as a particle physicist, do we live and conduct our lives in accordance with that? I mean, do I just say that, none of you who are now listening to me, none of you really exist, but you're just a bunch of leptons and quarks that I'm seeing in front of me. And it's obviously I won't be saying something as absurd. So there is a phenomenological term that one takes here to say that having understood the world in an abstract way, you come back to the world. And in that coming back to the world is actually the need that we find for understanding other things. Because if you were to just say that that is it, and because I've said the world is mithya, the world is quarks and leptons, that nothing else exists. The whole question is from those quarks and leptons, how did this world of living, thinking, talking, zooming individuals come up? That is the question. Or how from that world of illusion, this phenomenal world which gives us the idea of that illusion appeared. That is also the question. So we need to really understand that we don't live in our disciplines. This is a very important thing to understand. We may work in certain disciplines, we accept and do research using the epistemic charts that that discipline offers us. But that is not what we are limited to as human beings living in the larger world. There's much more to us than that. And that is exactly why the disciplinary window becomes just too narrow to contain us.
Yeah, right. And also, the questioner has put it as a very strong dichotomy, but in reality, it's not such a strong dichotomy if you start to deconstruct many of the concepts that we think are in objective reality, right? So there's that as well. Okay, so Dr. Vinita Gowda asks, I'm wondering if the idea of disciples, I'm wondering if the idea of discipline that has been discussed here is also a lexical issue. I guess it's like lexical means semantic. Yeah, did you mean semantic?
Yes, I meant it sort of as a semantic thing as well, because I'm a botanist by training. And so I'm coming from sort of experiences that I've seen and where I've arrived at right now. I'm a faculty at IISER Bhopal. And I understand the multidisciplinary issues, and I think most of you have addressed almost all many diverse points. But I've been wondering because, every other day I feel that as a faculty now, some days you're said you have to do multidisciplinary work, and then we end up doing multidisciplinary work. Then you're told, well, you're too wide, your research is all over the place. It's not specific enough. And so yes, this hedgehog and fox is now not two people, but just me. So me as an individual now have to be both, which I think is extremely an unfair and tall expectation from research, and the quality of research will suffer. So in many ways I feel, of course I trained as a botanist early on, and then at some point I was an ecologist, and then at some point I was an evolutionary ecologist, then I was a molecular biologist, and then I was a systematist, and then I came to India, and I made a conscious decision to call myself a botanist again, because the way I see science now is I study plants, and I can use any tool which is out there to study plants, and that's how I define myself. I kind of lecture the same to my lab and my students. And I feel like this idea of multidisciplinary sections is more so to, sometimes I'm not so sure, I feel this, maybe I'm wrong, that it's more to show what skill set you're using, right, rather than, or approach you are using. But like my lab uses multiple approaches, so I'm not able to pick how I should define my research. And is it not okay to just call yourself what is classically known as a botanist? Why should researchers like me be constrained to show that I'm multidisciplinary? I think it comes from the question and the fact that people haven't understood that science should be question-based. And if it's question-based, it doesn't matter what approach you're using. So I insist to my students and my cohort, my lab, that's how I would like to see science, is question-based. You will always be criticized by reviewers because they come from certain discipline. But I think it's I need to just sort of resist it in some form and insist that I'm still doing good science. So I think sometimes I wonder, like, should we really be discussing multidisciplinary? And if we are, then why are we discussing it? Is it because we don't respect each other, or it's because we don't understand how science needs to be done? I wonder sometimes,
Yeah, I think you've sort of presented the problem very clearly that I was trying to hint at when I said my words first. So firstly, I think we should not get confused between multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, because multidisciplinarity, as Sridhar said, is just sort of people coming together because they have some skills or because they have some piece of equipment and so on, and they all want to get their names on the paper. Whereas interdisciplinarity is actually thinking about empathizing with the worldview of the other discipline. So if you're a botanist, you're actually thinking about how the world looks to an evolutionary biologist or a molecular biologist, and you change your way of framing the problem itself, and presumably you're also problem driven. So then, it sort of pushes you naturally along the interdisciplinary path. It's not just multidisciplinary. And you've illustrated the classic problem that interdisciplinarians face, which is that of who evaluates their quality. Because when it comes to evaluating quality in our academics, we fall very, very short, because nowadays, people are not willing to even read a paper and evaluate its quality. They want to look at citations and what somebody else has thought of it, and so on. And then even worse, go by number of citations and these quantitative measures, rather than just actually read the paper and evaluate its quality. So I'm wondering whether, taking from this, the new university that KC College and other adjacent institutions is going to become can rethink how they're going to evaluate their faculty and their students, because it is not as if they are in a desert, because now we do have people like yourself, for example, who recognize the value of this interdisciplinarity and how one has to rethink how we do, how we evaluate, and how we disseminate also. So there is that kind of knowledge. So sort of to harness that in order to chart a somewhat new, not a new path, but a slightly different and more enabling path for themselves. So somebody asked, the International Board System of Education presents sciences in a transdisciplinary format. Can the periodic table be a classic example in teaching interdisciplinary? That sounds like right into Ram's lap.
Read the question again, because I can't see it.
Okay, it says the International Board System of Education presents, I request whoever to mute themselves, please. Okay, the International Board System of Education presents sciences in a transdisciplinary format. Can the periodic table be a classic example in teaching interdisciplinary?
one is sort of tempted to say yes, of course. Why not? Because I mean, you've got everything there from nuclear physics and chemistry all the way down to the world around us. You can use anything. I mean, you can use a glass of water to teach the difference between, so many different concepts. Interdisciplinarity or what, I mean, I think that one shouldn't get lost in the semantics. This is more a question of how you bring your approach to problems, especially if you're problem driven as a researcher. Then I think that, there are so many tools that one can use all around. I mean, I liked what Dr. Gowda was saying about, how she is, come back to calling herself a botanist. I mean, I don't think that she should feel, or anybody should feel obliged to, stick to the definitions that somebody else has of what their field is, because one of the things that we are all engaged in doing is in changing the boundaries of our fields. The flip side of that, and the somewhat sad part of it, is that those who tend to do more than one sort of discipline, so to speak, fall between stools, and so they miss out on some of the things that at an early career especially people look for. So I mean, there are pluses and minuses to that, but the interdisciplinarity itself doesn't require the periodic table. You could use it with just the ordinary table.
Okay, thanks. So Kawar Raj has a question.
Prajwal, I'm so sorry if I may, but I think Dr. Jayaraman wants to ask something, and he had, for a long time, I think he raised his hand.
Yeah, I mentioned Kawar Raj because it was listed in the Google Doc, and so I'm assuming.
Okay, so.
Yeah. So we can take Dr. Jayaraman after that.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
I just like to share my experience. Say about 45 years ago, I did the management course from KC College of Management Studies. And during that time, I had just joined as a chemical engineer in the Bhabha Atomic Research Center. So in the evening time, I joined the management course in KC College, and made some little bit of finance and human resources development. So what I find, the area in which I was working was basically on the radioactive waste management, where various disciplines of science and engineering came together to work on a problem on geological disposal of radioactive waste, which is really interdisciplinary, from development of glass matrix to the interaction between glass and groundwater, soil, the mining, deep mining, all these disciplines. So here I wanted to give an example of multidiscipline where the science and engineering both come together, and the subject of management are helping in working on a project on the engineering side. When we come to the interdisciplinary, I'm finding in few engineering colleges now, we are having the courses which is called dual courses. You have both study of management and engineering started from the very first year itself. So maybe a new university can think whether we can integrate more than one subject in our courses so that we develop this approach of interdisciplinary among the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Jayaraman?
Yeah. Part of my question was asked, and Kanvaraj and myself belong to the Homi Bhabha training school, and we have been exposed to the interdisciplinary course earlier. My point here is, using the periodic table to teach international mindedness has been the powerful weapon with international baccalaureate system. We have a sizable population of students who have graduated through that interdisciplinary system and have now established trajectories and careers. If we want evidence-based reasoning for interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary teaching of physical and biological sciences, we should look at the career paths of those groups of people who have gone through the international baccalaureate system. And it is being perfected and honed as such a powerful tool, right from hydrogen to organism. We can bring in a huge amount of data. As Professor Ram said, yes, a molecule of water itself, a drop of water itself is enough to diversify into thought processes. But my contention here is we need evidence-based reasoning to show that interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary education at the Ivy level has data available for an analysis. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have come to the end of the questions. Lena, would you please confirm, are there any questions that I've missed out?
Suraj, are there any questions?
No, there are no more questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then maybe we can sort of come towards a conclusion. To my mind, I think this has been a pretty positive thing, because it can be a very intimidating path ahead when we know that interdisciplinarity is an imperative on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are all these barriers to it. And to me, for a new university like yours, it seems like two things really practicable things stood out. One is the idea of curriculum development. So curriculum development with an interdisciplinary lens, especially interdisciplinary across the social and natural sciences and humanities, is a real opportunity, I think, because it doesn't require sort of moving this whole, somebody called it juggernaut, somebody called it low, high inertia thing. It doesn't involve that. It just requires a few expert people in interdisciplinary thinking and experience to come up with curriculum development, and then it is bound to attract both from the faculty end and from the students end people who are already disposed to interdisciplinary thinking, but also maybe those who are kind of sitting on the fence and see this thing as very attractive. So I think that's an opportunity that new universities have. And another one which was kind of sort of emphasized also by the personal experiences of some people who spoke is the business of hiring practices and evaluation. So in your hiring practices, if you require an additional criterion that the people that you hire have to be open to more interdisciplinary thinking, teaching, and also collaboration, that might make for a much easier path ahead, it looks like. So I think we're almost on time. Did anybody want to sort of drop any final words?
Yes, Rajwal, could I?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
No, I wanted to also say that one things that we should celebrate about our educational system, which has always been very multifaceted and very diverse. There is an attempt, and some of it is not so subtle. There is an attempt to uniformize everything, essentially. And that is dangerous, because one size does not fit all. Not only does it not fit all of us, I don't think it's going to fit all of us in the future that I can see. I mean, to belabor the point, any student we are educating today is going to remain active for a few decades from now. And so that kind of diversity has got to be encouraged. And my request to the university would be to exercise that diversity. Demand it. Do not, do what one has to in order to get accreditation and so on, but one has to be careful that one is not put into a straitjacket and made to conform to some unnecessary set of rules and regulations. So, it's easier to say this from the outside, but I think it's really important to allow that diversity, because that's really been one of the best things about our educational system so far. And congratulations again for having done this webinar, and I've enjoyed being here and listening and speaking and so on and so forth. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Sridhar, did you want to drop any final word?
I just wanted to say, in response to some of the things that were said, I think there is, of course, a lot of many institutions now which are showing a lot of interest in multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary education and so on. But like you said, the issue of evaluation is still very complicated, and they have not figured out how to evaluate their own faculty using criteria which are which fit into this paradigm of interdisciplinarity. And, I think that is something that these institutions really need to think about, and that otherwise it's going to be really a stumbling block, because we won't have people to deliver these kind of alternate programs, let's say, if they are not enabled in proper ways and they don't get the recognition for the work that they are doing.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't think I have anything to add to that. So I will now hand over to Kavita Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shastri. It is a great delight to thank all the distinguished panelists and participants for this wonderful round of discussions. We conclude today's webinar with significant takeaways that suggest trajectories of disrupting rigid disciplinary boundaries and to explore it as a viable possibility in academia. At the onset, I sincerely thank all our distinguished speakers on the panel. Many thanks to Dr. Ramaswamy and Dr. Sridhar for expansively articulating what should be our responses to emerging epistemological shifts, rethinking teaching methods, challenges to the educational models, methods of inquiry. I also thank Dr. Prajwal Shastri for skillfully moderating the interactions with the participants and also sharing her aspirational blueprint for future academic values, particularly with emphasis on critical thinking and dismantling institutional inequities of various kinds. The conversations have resonated the need for more expertise to navigate a changed global scenario. But I think it also leaves us with the thought that we need expertise that is sensitive to the needs of a diverse set of people. This webinar by the research committee has had the unfaltering encouragement of Dr. Hemlata Bagla, the Vice Chancellor of HSNC University and the Principal of KC College. I thank Dr. Bagla for presenting a wonderful survey of possible transdisciplinary world where science, humanities, and social sciences converge. Thank you so much, ma'am, for preempting such significant academic conversations for our institution and sustaining them through the work of the research committee of KC College. We are also happy to have Mr. Anil Harish, trustee and former president of HSNC board, and join us for this webinar. Thank you, sir, for sharing your nuanced perception of interdisciplinarity, which drew on your experience in law, and also expanding the scope of today's conversations. I must place on record the contribution of the vice principals as well as senior faculty, Dr. Sagarika Damle, Coordinator Star College Status, Dr. Shalini Sinha, Coordinator Star Scheme, and Dr. Leena Pujari, Convener of Research Committee, who have conceptualized and carried forward today's program. I also thank all members of the Research Committee, Dr. Pratiksha Kadam, and particularly Suraj Kamdar for their unstinting contribution to every aspect of today's webinar. The tech team deserves a special mention here, who have ensured an ease of virtual interaction in times of social distancing. Last but not the least, I thank the diverse participants that included eminent scholars, faculty, and students joining us from different parts of the world to engage spiritedly with these prescient questions and debates on interdisciplinarity. Please do remember to share your feedback on the link provided in the chat box, and do let us know how we can enhance our efforts in organizing related programs. Thank you all for the privilege of your time and for making this webinar engaging. I wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you so much.